The velvet seat beside Beatrice Langford remained conspicuously empty as the house lights dimmed. She smoothed the burgundy silk of her gown and forced her breathing steady, ignoring the weight of curious stares pressing against her shoulders. Julian Corwin's absence wasn't merely inconvenient, it was humiliating. Half the town had watched her arrive alone, watched her save the seat with a pointed glance, watched her check the entrance every 30 seconds like some desperate debutante. "Miss Langford." The voice came low and infuriatingly familiar, cutting through the orchestra's tuning like a blade through silk. "I believe this seat is available." Beatrice's spine went rigid. She didn't need to look up to know who stood there, but she did anyway because she refused to give Alexander Grayson, Duke of Northcliffe, the satisfaction of intimidation. He stood in the aisle, immaculate in black evening wear that made his broad shoulders seem carved from shadow. Candlelight caught the sharp angle of his jaw, the cool assessment in his grey eyes that had catalogued her every business maneuver for 7 years, eyes that had watched her outbid him on the Merchant's Row property with something dangerously close to admiration before freezing into professional contempt. "That seat," Beatrice said quietly, aware of the ears straining around them, "is reserved. For Mr. Corwin, I assume." Alexander lowered himself into the chair with the casual authority of someone who had never been denied anything. How unfortunate that he sent his regrets. Her fingers tightened on her fan. He did no such thing. "No." Alexander arranged his long legs in the cramped space, his thigh a hair's breadth from hers. The heat of him radiated through layers of fabric, unwelcome and impossible to ignore. "Then perhaps you should look toward the Duke of Somerset's box, 3rd tier, Mr. Corwin seems quite engaged in conversation with Lady Isabel Waverley." Beatrice's gaze snapped upward. Through the gilded tiers of the opera house, she could just make out Julian Corwin's distinctive auburn hair as he leaned close to a woman in emerald silk, his hand resting possessively on the back of her chair. The betrayal burned less than the embarrassment. She'd been played. The Corwin siblings had used her interest in their shipping contracts as bait, and she'd walked straight into their trap like some naive girl fresh from the countryside. "If you came here to gloat," she started. "I came," Alexander interrupted, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper, as the conductor raised his baton, "because the Corwins are not what they seem, and because, Miss Langford, I believe we have a common enemy." The music swelled, making further conversation impossible. But Beatrice's pulse hammered against her throat, drowning out the soprano's opening aria. She'd spent 7 years treating Alexander Grayson as her primary rival, the man whose family's transportation empire competed directly with her father's textile mills, the man who dismissed her ideas in 3 separate trade meetings, the man who represented everything she'd been fighting against in a world that believed women belonged in drawing rooms, not boardrooms. And now he was suggesting an alliance. His hand moved to the armrest between them, close enough that she could see the precise way his fingers drummed against the velvet in time with the music. Close enough that she noticed the small scar along his knuckle, a detail she'd never been near enough to observe. "Meet me," he murmured during a quiet passage, not looking at her. "Tomorrow, the reading room at White's. Women aren't permitted in White's. The private reading room, 2 o'clock. I'll ensure discretion. Why should I trust you?" Finally he turned his head, and the directness of his gaze made something low in her stomach tighten. "Because, Miss Langford, if the Corwins succeed in what they're planning, neither of our families will survive it. And as much as it pains me to admit this," his mouth quirked, not quite a smile, "you're the only person in London sharp enough to help me stop them." The compliment landed like a physical blow. Alexander Grayson didn't give compliments. He gave calculated assessments, delivered in that cool, measured tone that made even praise sound like clinical observation. "I don't need your help," she whispered back. "No," he agreed, his attention returning to the stage. "You never do. That's precisely what makes you invaluable." The opera continued, but Beatrice heard nothing. Her mind raced through possibilities, through risks, through the memory of Julian Corwin's charming smile that now felt like a mask, through the rumor she'd dismissed last week about the Corwin family's sudden acquisition of warehouses near the docks, through the odd pattern of her suppliers receiving generous offers from unnamed buyers, through the uncomfortable truth that Alexander might be right. When the first act ended and the house lights rose, he stood smoothly, offered her a bow that was precisely correct and entirely impersonal, and walked away without another word. Half the audience watched him go. The other half watched her, speculation written across their faces in various shades of curiosity and scandal. Lady Philippa Hartwell appeared at her elbow before Beatrice could escape, her widow's blacks making her sharp features even more striking. "Well," Philippa said, amusement dancing in her dark eyes. "That was certainly theatrical. Should I prepare for wedding announcements or a duel?" "Neither." Beatrice gathered her reticule and stood, needing air, needing space, needing to think. "It was nothing. Darling, when Alexander Grayson claims a seat beside a woman, especially you, it's never nothing." Philippa linked their arms, guiding them toward the corridor. "He's been watching you all season. Haven't you noticed?" "He's been watching my business transactions. There's a difference." "Is there?" Philippa's smile turned knowing. "Because from where I sat, the way he looked at you just now had nothing to do with textile mills and everything to do with the fact that you're the only woman in London who's ever told him to go to hell in front of the Board of Trade." The memory surfaced unbidden. 3 years ago, Alexander questioning her proposal to expand river transport, his tone suggesting he found the idea charmingly naive. She'd stood up, gathered her papers, and informed him that his opinion held precisely as much weight as his understanding of modern commerce, which was to say none at all. Then she'd walked out. She'd secured the contract the following week. "That doesn't mean—" "It means," Philippa interrupted gently, "that he respects you, which, for a man like Alexander Grayson, is far more dangerous than mere attraction." Beatrice wanted to argue, wanted to dismiss it as Philippa's tendency toward romantic interpretation. But the memory of his voice, "You're the only person in London sharp enough to help me stop them," echoed too loudly to ignore. "I need to speak with him," she admitted. "About business, I'm sure." "Philippa?" "I'm only saying," her friend continued innocently, "that if you're going to engage in clandestine meetings with London's most eligible duke, you should at least wear the blue gown. It makes your eyes look devastating." "Despite everything," Beatrice laughed, "I'm not trying to devastate him." "Pity." Philippa squeezed her arm. "Because I suspect he's already half devastated by you. He simply hasn't realized it yet." The private reading room at White's smelled of leather and old tobacco, its walls lined with books that Beatrice suspected no one actually read. Alexander stood by the window when she arrived, his back to the door, hands clasped behind him, in that particular posture of ducal contemplation she'd seen him adopt before making a business decision. "You came," he said without turning. "Did you doubt I would?" "No." He faced her then, and in the afternoon light filtering through the window she noticed the faint shadows beneath his eyes. "You've never been one to ignore a potential advantage, even when offered by an adversary. Is that what we are? Adversaries? What would you call 7 years of systematic attempts to outmaneuver each other in every commercial venture this side of the Thames?" "Competition," Beatrice said, removing her gloves with deliberate care. "Healthy rivalry. Mutual motivation." His mouth twitched. "How diplomatic. Very unlike you." She met his gaze directly. "Tell me about the Corwins." Alexander moved to the table, spreading out several documents with the efficiency of someone who'd prepared thoroughly. Julian and Isabel Corwin arrived from Liverpool 3 months ago. Their father's shipping company collapsed last year under suspicious circumstances, rumours of fraud, though nothing proven. The siblings claimed they wanted a fresh start in London. And you don't believe them? "I believe they're very good at presenting exactly what people want to see." He tapped one document. "Julian has been courting connections with every major trade family in the city, including yours." "He expressed interest in our fabric exports," Beatrice admitted, studying the papers. "Suggested his shipping routes could offer better rates than Grayson Transport." "Naturally." Alexander's tone was dry. "He approached us as well, suggesting our warehouses were underutilized and he could negotiate better terms with merchants directly. And you refused. I grew suspicious when 3 of our suppliers suddenly received offers to sell their businesses, very generous offers from unnamed buyers." Beatrice's chest tightened. "That happened to us as well. 2 of our linen suppliers in Kent. Father thought it was coincidence." "It wasn't." Alexander pulled out another document, this one dense with names and numbers. "The buyers were shell companies. I traced them back through 6 layers of ownership. They all connect to a single source. The Corwins, a trust controlled by their late father's business partner, who conveniently died last year, leaving everything to Julian and Isabel." Alexander's jaw tightened. "They're not here to build a business, Miss Langford. They're here to systematically acquire control of London's trade infrastructure, and then crush anyone who might compete with them, Beatrice finished. The audacity of it was almost impressive. Almost. They're trying to create a monopoly, and they're using charm and misdirection to do it. Alexander's gaze found hers. Julian was never interested in courting you. He was gathering intelligence, learning your suppliers, your contracts, your vulnerabilities. The anger that rose in Beatrice's throat was less about Julian's deception and more about her own blindness. She prided herself on reading people, on seeing through social performance to the calculation beneath. She'd missed this entirely. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. "Why not simply move against them yourself?" "Because they've been more successful than I'd like to admit." The confession seemed to cost him. "They've already secured contracts with 4 of my key warehouses. If they continue at this pace, Grayson & Sons will be shipping goods in buildings we no longer control, at prices they dictate. And my family's mills? We'll find their fabric transported through Corwin-controlled routes at triple the current cost, or not transported at all." Alexander leaned back against the table, arms crossed. "Separately, we might survive. Together, we could stop them." "Yes." Beatrice paced to the window, mind racing through implications. An alliance with Alexander Grayson meant pooling resources, sharing information, coordinating strategy. It meant spending time with the man who'd been her primary professional obstacle for nearly a decade. It also meant survival. "What exactly are you proposing?" she asked. "A temporary partnership. 6 weeks should be sufficient to investigate fully, secure our suppliers, and outmaneuver the Corwins before they consolidate further power." "And how do you suggest we explain our sudden cooperation to all of London?" Alexander was quiet for a long moment. When Beatrice turned to look at him, something unreadable flickered across his face. "We tell them, I'm courting you." The words hung in the air between them like a challenge. "You cannot be serious." "It's the most efficient solution." His tone was perfectly reasonable, as though he hadn't just suggested something completely absurd. "It explains why we're suddenly spending time together. It provides cover for private meetings. It's ridiculous." Beatrice couldn't help the disbelieving laugh that escaped. "You and I can barely tolerate each other, can't we?" He pushed off from the table, closing the distance between them with 3 measured steps. "You're intelligent, strategic, and ruthless when necessary. I respect all of those qualities. Respect is hardly the foundation for courtship." "No," he agreed. "But it's a better foundation than most marriages I've observed in society. And we're not actually courting, Miss Langford. We're simply allowing people to believe we are." Beatrice studied him, searching for the trap she knew must exist. Alexander Grayson didn't make careless suggestions. Every word he spoke was calculated, every action designed to achieve maximum advantage. "What do you gain from this?" she asked. "Beyond protection from the Corwins?" His eyes held hers. "The satisfaction of watching you work. You have one of the finest strategic minds I've encountered, and I've never had the opportunity to see it directed toward anything but my destruction. I'm curious what we might accomplish together." The honesty of it caught her off guard. No flowery language, no false flattery, just straightforward acknowledgement of her capabilities. "People will expect us to behave like a courting couple," she pointed out. "There will be expectations of affection. Then we'll meet those expectations." Something dangerous flickered in his expression. "I trust you can tolerate my company for the length of a waltz, Miss Langford, and I assure you, I'm capable of appearing besotted when necessary." Besotted. She couldn't keep the skepticism from her voice. "Is that such an impossible concept?" He tilted his head slightly, studying her with that unnerving focus. "You're accomplished, beautiful, sharp-tongued enough to keep any man on his toes. I imagine appearing interested will require less acting than you think. Beautiful." He'd said it as casually as he might comment on the weather, as though it were simply an observed fact rather than a compliment. Beatrice's pulse kicked up traitorously. 6 weeks, she said. 6 weeks. "And at the end, we part ways cordially. No expectations, no obligations." "Agreed. I maintain full control of my family's business decisions. I wouldn't dream of interfering. And if you attempt to use this arrangement to gain advantage over Langford Mills, then you have my permission to destroy me publicly." A slight smile touched his mouth. "Does that satisfy your concerns?" "No," Beatrice thought, because the primary concern blooming in her chest had nothing to do with business, and everything to do with the way her body had responded to his proximity, to the quiet intensity in his voice when he'd called her beautiful. But those concerns were irrelevant. This was a business arrangement, nothing more. "When do we begin?" she asked. "Tonight, the Ashworth ball. I'll call for you at 8. "The Ashworth?" Beatrice's eyes widened. "Alexander, that's one of the most visible events of the season. Everyone will be there." "Precisely." He moved toward the door, then paused. "And Miss Langford? You might want to call me Alexander from this point forward. It would seem odd for my courting partner to address me with such formality. Then you should call me Beatrice." "Beatrice?" He said her name slowly, as though testing the shape of it. "I'll see you this evening." When the door closed behind him, Beatrice sank into the nearest chair, her legs suddenly unsteady. She'd just agreed to fake courtship with Alexander Grayson. She'd agreed to spend 6 weeks pretending to be wooed by the man who represented everything she'd fought against. And the truly terrifying part was the small voice in the back of her mind whispering that pretending might be far more dangerous than any business rivalry they'd ever engaged in. The Ashworth ballroom glittered with 1,000 candles, their light reflecting off gilded mirrors and the diamonds adorning London's elite. Beatrice felt every eye in the room turn when she entered on Alexander's arm. "You look exceptional," he murmured, his breath warm against her temple. "The blue becomes you." Philippa's suggestion, worn because Beatrice had stubbornly refused to overthink her choice. Now she wondered if that had been a mistake. The sapphire silk clung to her curves in ways her usual modest gowns did not, the neckline just daring enough to be memorable. "Flattery, Your Grace?" She kept her voice light. "How unexpected." "Observation." His hand tightened infinitesimally on her arm. "And you might try to look less suspicious. Courting couples generally don't regard each other like opposing generals. Perhaps we should have rehearsed." "Perhaps." Alexander guided her toward the refreshment table, nodding to acquaintances but not stopping. "Though I find your inability to feign affection rather endearing." "I'm perfectly capable of—" "Miss Langford, Your Grace!" Lady Ashworth descended upon them like a ship under full sail, her smile so wide it looked painful. "How absolutely delightful to see you together. I had no idea, that is, one had heard rumors, of course, but Lady Ashworth." Alexander bowed smoothly. "Thank you for your hospitality. Miss Langford and I are grateful for the opportunity to celebrate this evening." The phrasing was deliberate, not vague enough to deny, not explicit enough to confirm. Beatrice watched understanding dawn across their hostess's face, followed immediately by greedy calculation. This story would be all over London by morning. "You must dance," Lady Ashworth insisted. "The waltz is beginning shortly. I absolutely insist." "We would be delighted," Alexander said, before Beatrice could respond. When Lady Ashworth finally released them, Beatrice leaned closer. "You could have asked me first. Would you have said yes?" "No. Then I made the correct decision." His mouth quirked. "Besides, you just said you were perfectly capable of feigning affection. Now's your opportunity to prove it." The music swelled as they took their positions on the floor. Alexander's hand settled at her waist, warm and solid through the thin silk. Beatrice placed her palm against his shoulder, acutely aware of the hard muscle beneath the fine wool of his coat. "You're holding yourself like you expect me to bite," he observed as they began to move. "Can you blame me? Every interaction we've had for 7 years has been some form of combat." "True." He guided her through a turn with surprising grace. "But effective combat requires understanding your opponent, and I'm beginning to think I've misunderstood you quite thoroughly." "How so?" "I assumed you hated me." Beatrice blinked. "I don't hate you." "No?" They spun through a series of steps, the room blurring around them. "You've undermined 3 of my business proposals, outbid me on 2 properties, and once told the Board of Trade that my expansion plans showed all the foresight of a particularly dim child." "You deserved that," she said without heat. "Your plan would have disrupted established trade routes for minimal gain. So you weren't trying to hurt me. You were trying to stop me from making a mistake." "I was trying to protect my interests. That you happened to benefit was coincidental." "Was it?" His grey eyes held hers, searching for something. "Or have we been circling each other all this time, each too proud to admit we might be useful allies instead of enemies?" The question cut too close to thoughts Beatrice had never let herself fully form. There had been moments over the years, brief flashes when Alexander's strategic brilliance had impressed her despite herself, when she'd found herself anticipating his counter-arguments with something that felt disturbingly like excitement. "You're overthinking this," she said instead. We're temporary partners. Nothing more. Of course. But something in his tone suggested he didn't entirely believe it. Though I should warn you, Julian Corwin has been watching us since we began dancing. Beatrice resisted the urge to look. Where? Near the terrace doors, with his sister. Alexander pulled her infinitesimally closer, the movement protective rather than romantic. They seem quite interested in our sudden intimacy. Good. Let them wonder. Is that satisfaction I hear in your voice, Beatrice? She met his gaze. You're not the only one who enjoys strategic victories. His laugh was quiet, meant only for her. No, I'm beginning to realize that. We're rather alike, aren't we? I'm nothing like you, aren't you? The waltz was ending, but Alexander held her a moment longer than necessary. Driven, ambitious, willing to do whatever necessary to protect what matters. The only real difference is that you've had to fight twice as hard for half the recognition. The acknowledgement landed with unexpected force. In 7 years of professional rivalry, Alexander had never once dismissed her because of her gender. He'd fought her ideas because he disagreed with them, not because he believed her incapable of having them. That's the first time you've admitted it, she said quietly, that you've been systematically denied the respect you deserve simply because you're a woman. His expression turned serious. I've always known it, Beatrice. Why do you think I've never once suggested you defer to your father's judgment, as half the board regularly does? I thought you simply found me irritating enough to engage with directly. That too. His smile returned, softer than before. But primarily because you're brilliant, and treating you as anything less would be insulting to us both. Before Beatrice could respond, Philippa appeared beside them, her eyes sparkling with mischief. Your Grace, if you continue monopolizing my dearest friend, people will think you're serious about this courtship. Lady Hartwell, Alexander bowed. One can only hope they do. Then you won't mind if I borrow her for a moment? Girl talk, you understand? Provided you return her in one piece. Philippa practically dragged Beatrice toward the terrace. Once safely away from the crowd, she turned with barely suppressed glee. You're courting Alexander Grayson. Actually courting him. We're not, Beatrice struggled for words. It's complicated. It's fascinating is what it is. Philippa studied her face. You do realize half the women in London would sell their jewels for the way he just looked at you during that waltz. He was performing, we both were. Darling, I've seen performances. That wasn't performance. That was a man looking at a woman like she's the answer to a question he's been asking his entire life. Beatrice's heart stuttered. You're romanticizing. Perhaps. Philippa's smile turned knowing. Or perhaps you're so busy treating this as a business arrangement that you're missing what's actually happening. Nothing is happening. We have a mutual goal, a temporary alliance. And approximately 6 seconds ago you called him Alexander instead of His Grace or the Duke. Philippa squeezed her hand. I'm not saying you have to fall in love with him, darling. I'm simply suggesting you allow yourself the possibility that this arrangement might become something more complicated than you planned. I don't want it to be complicated. I know. Philippa's expression softened. You've spent your whole life keeping men at a distance because getting close meant being seen as weak, as less competent. But Alexander isn't most men. He sees you, Beatrice, and he likes what he sees. Before Beatrice could formulate a response, a new voice cut through the evening air. Miss Langford, how unexpected to find you here. Julian Corwin stepped onto the terrace, his smile charming and completely false now that Beatrice knew to look for it. Behind him, partially hidden in shadow, stood Isabel, watching, calculating. Mr. Corwin, Beatrice kept her tone polite. I believe you missed our appointment at the opera. An unfortunate necessity. Business called me away at the last moment. His gaze flicked toward the ballroom, where Alexander stood in conversation with Lord Ashworth. Though I see you weren't left without companionship, the Duke was kind enough to keep me company. Kind. Julian stepped closer, his voice dropping. I wonder if the Duke is ever kind without purpose, Miss Langford. You're an intelligent woman. Surely you see that his sudden interest comes at a convenient time, just as your family's mills face some challenges with supplier relations. Beatrice's spine went rigid. I don't know what you mean. Don't you? Isabel emerged from the shadows, emerald silk whispering. We've heard troubling rumors about Langford Mills, suppliers requesting renegotiations, transportation costs rising unexpectedly. And now Alexander Grayson, who controls much of London's transport infrastructure, suddenly appears as your devoted suitor. Her smile was ice. One might wonder if he's courting you or your business contracts. The seed of doubt was planted expertly. Beatrice felt it lodge in her chest, despite knowing exactly what they were doing. This was manipulation, obvious and clumsy. Except it wasn't entirely clumsy, was it? Because the question had validity. Alexander did control transportation. He could easily be using this arrangement to secure favorable terms while appearing to offer partnership. The Duke's intentions, Beatrice said carefully, are his own concern. Of course. Julian's expression oozed false sympathy. I simply hate to see someone as brilliant as you being used, Miss Langford. My sister and I, we understand what it's like to be underestimated, to have to fight for respect in a world that would rather we fade into obscurity. We'd hoped to offer you genuine partnership, but if you prefer the Duke's arrangement, he let the sentence trail off, the implication clear. Choose us and it's real, choose him and you're being played. I appreciate your concern, Beatrice said, her voice like cut glass, but I'm perfectly capable of managing my own affairs. No doubt, Isabel stepped closer. Though if you ever need allies who see your value without ulterior motive, you know where to find us. They departed as smoothly as they'd arrived, leaving Beatrice and Philippa alone on the terrace. The evening suddenly felt colder. They're lying, Philippa said immediately. Whatever doubts they just planted, I know they're lying, but Beatrice's hands were shaking. That doesn't make the questions less valid. Alexander respects you. You saw it yourself tonight. Respect and exploitation aren't mutually exclusive. Beatrice pressed her palms together, steadying herself. I need to be smart about this. I can't let... Let what? Let yourself trust him? Philippa's voice gentled. Or let yourself want to trust him? The distinction cut to the bone. Because Philippa was right, the terrifying part wasn't the possibility that Alexander was using her. The terrifying part was how much she wanted to believe he wasn't. I should go back inside, Beatrice said. He's been watching the terrace door since you left. Philippa touched her arm. Whatever you're afraid of, darling, I don't think it's Alexander Grayson. No, Beatrice thought, as she returned to the ballroom. What she was afraid of was herself. Was the treacherous hope blooming beneath her ribs that maybe, just maybe, this arrangement could become something real? Alexander met her halfway across the floor, concern flickering across his features. What did they say to you? Nothing of consequence. Beatrice. He said her name like a reprimand. What did they say? She looked up at him, at the man who'd been her rival for 7 years, who'd never once treated her as less than his equal, who was offering partnership when he could have simply tried to crush her business. They suggested you're using this courtship to gain leverage over my family's contracts. Alexander's expression went cold. And you believed them? No. The answer came automatically, and Beatrice realized with shock that it was true. But I'd be a fool not to at least consider the possibility. Something in his face shifted. You're not a fool, you're cautious. There's a difference. He offered his arm. May I escort you home? I think we've provided enough entertainment for one evening. The carriage ride was silent at first, the darkness inside providing false privacy. Beatrice could feel Alexander's presence beside her, could sense the tension radiating from his carefully still form. I'm not using you, he said finally. I know that's what you must be wondering. I'm not... Yes, you are, and I don't blame you. He turned to face her, his expression barely visible in the dim light filtering through the window. You've spent your entire life being dismissed, undermined, treated as though your accomplishments were somehow less valid because of your gender. Of course you're suspicious of a man who suddenly appears offering partnership. Then why did you? The question emerged raw, vulnerable. Why not simply compete against the Corwins on your own? Because I would lose. The admission seemed to cost him. Not immediately. Perhaps not for months. But eventually, their strategy would work. They're targeting suppliers, transportation, storage, every link in the chain that keeps London's trade moving. Separately, the Langfords and Graysons can be isolated and eliminated. Together, we control too much of the infrastructure for them to consolidate power. That's logical strategy. Yes, it doesn't explain why you suggested courtship instead of simple business partnership. Alexander was quiet for a long moment. Because I wanted an excuse to spend time with you beyond negotiation tables and board meetings. Because I'm tired of only seeing you across crowded rooms. watching you dismantle someone else's flawed logic, and wondering what it would be like to have that mind working with mine instead of against it. He paused. Because you fascinate me, Beatrice. And I'm selfish enough to use the Corwin threat as justification for something I've wanted for longer than I care to admit. The confession hung between them like a held breath. Beatrice's heart hammered against her ribs. You can't say things like that, she managed. Why not? Because this is supposed to be pretend. Is it? His hand moved, not touching her, but close enough that she could feel the warmth of his palm near her cheek. You're the most honest person I know, Beatrice. You've never been able to lie convincingly, which is why you're such a terrible card player. So tell me honestly, does this feel pretend to you? No, she thought. It felt terrifyingly, devastatingly real. 6 weeks, she said instead. That's what we agreed. 6 weeks, he confirmed, but he didn't pull his hand away. And in those 6 weeks, I intend to prove to you that I'm not using you, that I see exactly who you are, and that the woman I see is worth far more than any business advantage. Alexander, you don't have to believe me now. His thumb ghosted across her cheek, not quite touching, but you will. The carriage stopped outside her family's townhouse. Alexander descended first, offering his hand to help her down with perfect propriety. On the front steps, under the watchful gaze of her family's butler, he bowed over her hand. Tomorrow, he said quietly, we visit your suppliers in Kent. Together. That's business, not courtship. With us, I suspect they'll always be intertwined. His lips brushed her knuckles, the touch sending electricity up her arm. Good night, Beatrice. She fled inside before he could see how much that simple gesture had affected her. Before she could do something foolish like ask him to stay. Upstairs in her room, Beatrice pressed her hands against the cool window glass and watched Alexander's carriage disappear into the night. 6 weeks, she'd agreed to. 6 weeks of pretending to be courted by a man who claimed he'd wanted this all along. 6 weeks to discover whether she could protect her heart while risking everything else. Behind her, a soft knock announced her lady's maid. Miss, you have correspondence. It arrived while you were out. Beatrice took the envelope, recognizing immediately the Corwin family seal. Inside, a single line in elegant script. Consider carefully who profits from your trust, Miss Langford. Not all dukes wear their intentions as openly as their titles. She crumpled the paper in her fist. The Corwins weren't going to let this be simple. They'd seen the threat immediately. An alliance between Langford and Grayson meant the end of their plans, which meant the next 6 weeks weren't just about pretending courtship or investigating the Corwin schemes. They were about survival. And despite every instinct screaming caution, despite a lifetime of guarding her heart against exactly this kind of vulnerability, Beatrice found herself hoping that when survival was secured, Alexander would still be standing beside her, not as a temporary ally, but as something infinitely more dangerous. The morning sun had barely crested the horizon when Alexander's carriage arrived. Beatrice descended the front steps to find him already on the pavement, examining the horses with the focused attention he brought to everything. You're punctual, she observed. You're surprised? Pleased, actually. Most men of your rank treat time as though it exists solely for their convenience. Most men of my rank, Alexander said, helping her into the carriage, haven't had the pleasure of learning that keeping you waiting results in 20 minutes of pointed observations about inefficiency and poor planning. Despite herself, Beatrice smiled. You've been paying attention. Always. He settled across from her as the carriage lurched into motion. I brought the supplier contracts you requested. Also, my investigator's latest report on the Corwins' property acquisitions. All business, then. Somehow that was both reassuring and disappointing. Beatrice accepted the documents, spreading them across her lap. Alexander watched her read with that particular stillness he possessed, the kind that made you forget he was there until you looked up and found his complete attention fixed on you. 3 more warehouse purchases, she said after several minutes, all within sight of major trade routes, and all purchased through different shell companies. The pattern's becoming clear. They're building a chokehold. Beatrice traced the map with one finger. Control the warehouses, control the routes, control the prices. Anyone who wants to ship goods through London has to go through them. Or pay exorbitant fees to find alternative routes. Alexander leaned forward. Which is why we need to secure our suppliers before the Corwins approach them. If we can lock in contracts now at current rates, they'll be forced to compete on quality rather than manipulation. Beatrice looked up. That's brilliant. It's pragmatic. The brilliant part was your suggestion last night about coordinating our shipping manifests to maximize warehouse efficiency. I had my clerks run the numbers this morning. He handed her another paper. We could reduce transport costs by nearly 30%. The implications were staggering. Our families have been competing for the same resources when we should have been coordinating all along. Yes. We're idiots. Proud idiots, Alexander corrected. There's a difference. The comfortable ease of the exchange caught Beatrice off guard. This was how they should have been working all along. Two sharp minds attacking a problem from complementary angles, building on each other's strengths rather than exploiting weaknesses. It felt natural, right, dangerous. Tell me about the Ashworth ball, Alexander said, apparently sensing her shift in mood. What else did the Corwins say to you? Beatrice hesitated, then decided on honesty. They implied you were using this courtship to gain leverage over my family's business. I know, I heard. She blinked. You were listening? Lady Hartwell positioned herself where I could observe the terrace. His expression was unreadable. I wanted to intervene, but she advised me that you'd resent the implication you couldn't handle them yourself. She was right. She usually is. Alexander's gaze held hers. But for the record, if they'd posed actual physical threat rather than mere manipulation, I would have intervened regardless of your potential resentment. The casual protectiveness in his tone made something warm unfurl in Beatrice's chest. I can defend myself. I don't doubt it. That doesn't mean you should have to. He paused. Though I admit, watching you verbally eviscerate Julian Corwin with perfect politeness was deeply satisfying. You sound almost proud. I am proud. You're magnificent when you're angry. The compliment landed with unexpected weight. Most men found her anger off-putting, something to be managed or dismissed. Alexander spoke as though it were an attribute to be admired. You're trying to charm me, Beatrice said, aiming for accusatory and landing somewhere closer to pleased. Is it working? Insufferably well. His smile was slow, genuine. Good, because we're arriving at our first supplier, and I need you properly charmed for what I'm about to suggest. Why do I feel like I should be concerned? Because you're intelligent. Alexander leaned closer, dropping his voice conspiratorially. Mr. Henderson has been our linen supplier for 15 years. He's traditional, conservative, and deeply romantic. If we want him to sign an extended contract before the Corwins approach him, we need to present a united front. Meaning? Meaning he needs to believe we're genuinely courting. Which means... Alexander's expression turned carefully neutral. I'm going to need to touch you, nothing inappropriate but enough to be convincing. Beatrice's pulse kicked up. Define touch. Hand at your waist as we walk, perhaps my arm around your shoulders in casual affection, the occasional gesture of... He paused. Intimacy. Such as brushing a curl from your face, straightening your collar, small things that suggest comfort and familiarity. It was entirely reasonable, necessary even. So why did Beatrice's skin suddenly feel too warm? Fine, she managed, but nothing more than... Nothing you're not comfortable with, Alexander interrupted firmly. I promise. The moment you want me to stop, I will. The carriage halted outside Henderson & Sons, a modest building that smelled of fresh linen and wool. Mr. Henderson himself greeted them at the door, his weathered face breaking into a surprised smile. Your Grace, and Miss Langford, I hadn't expected, that is, together. Mr. Henderson. Alexander's hand settled at the small of Beatrice's back, warm and steady through the layers of her dress. Thank you for seeing us. Miss Langford and I are evaluating potential partnerships, and naturally your company was first on our list. The touch wasn't possessive. It was supportive, as though Alexander was silently communicating, I'm here. You're not alone in this. Beatrice found herself leaning infinitesimally into it. Partnerships! Mr. Henderson ushered them inside, his expression delighted. How wonderful. I'd heard rumors, of course, that you and the Duke were, but one never knows what to believe. The rumors, Beatrice said, surprising herself with the steadiness of her voice, are entirely true. Alexander's fingers pressed briefly against her spine, a gesture of approval that sent warmth flooding through her. The meeting proceeded smoothly. Mr. Henderson showed them his operation with obvious pride, explaining his concerns about recent offers from unnamed buyers. When Alexander presented their proposal, extended contracts at current rates, guaranteed transport through Grayson routes, coordinated production with Langford Mills. The older man's relief was palpable. "It's more than fair, Your Grace. Miss Langford." He glanced between them, his eyes twinkling. "If you don't mind my saying, it's good to see the two families working together. Your fathers, they had such rivalry. Seemed a shame, two brilliant minds always at odds." "We're attempting to correct that mistake," Alexander said quietly. His thumb traced a small circle against Beatrice's back, the gesture absent-minded and entirely too intimate. "Some rivalries, we've learned, are simply misunderstood partnerships." Mr. Henderson beamed. "Well said, Your Grace. Well said indeed." Outside, as they returned to the carriage, Alexander's hand lingered at Beatrice's waist a moment longer than necessary. "That went well." It did. She looked up at him, suddenly aware of how close they were standing. "You were right about presenting United Front." "I'm occasionally right about things." His smile turned self-deprecating. "Though don't let it become common knowledge. I have a reputation for infallibility to maintain. Your secret is safe with me." "Is it?" Something shifted in his expression. "Because I'm finding I want to share quite a few secrets with you, Beatrice Langford. And that's rather unprecedented." Before she could respond, a voice called out from down the street. "Your Grace, Miss Langford." They turned to find Philippa approaching, her widow's blacks stark against the morning sun. She carried a basket covered with linen, her expression radiating mischief. "What fortunate timing," she said, not sounding surprised at all. "I was just visiting my aunt nearby. How lovely to find you both here, together, alone, on what appears to be a business call." "Lady Hartwell." Alexander's tone was dry. "Your timing is as always impeccable." "Isn't it?" Philippa's eyes danced. "I don't suppose you're free for lunch. There's a delightful inn nearby, and I'd hate to eat alone." "We have 3 more suppliers to visit," Beatrice started. "Which can wait until after lunch, surely." Philippa linked her arm through Beatrice's. "Besides, you need a chaperone. People are already talking about the Duke's sudden interest. Best not to add reckless disregard for propriety to the rumors." She wasn't wrong. Alexander nodded. "The inn sounds perfect." The meal was surprisingly pleasant. Philippa regaled them with society gossip, carefully steering conversation away from anything too serious, while simultaneously ensuring they were seen together by several prominent families. It was masterful social manipulation, and Beatrice found herself grateful for her friend's intervention. "You're good at this," Alexander observed to Philippa over dessert. "Managing perception." "Widowhood has its advantages." Philippa's smile turned knowing. "People underestimate women who've been married. They think we're too consumed with grief to pay attention. In reality, we see everything." She glanced at Beatrice, including things the participants themselves might be missing. "Philippa," Beatrice warned, "I'm only saying that for 2 people engaged in pretend courtship, you seem remarkably comfortable with each other." Philippa stood, gathering her things. "Now? I really must go. Do give my regards to your remaining suppliers." After she left, Alexander leaned back in his chair. "She's terrifying. She's perceptive. Those aren't mutually exclusive." His gaze found Beatrice's. "Is she right? Are we comfortable with each other?" The honest answer was yes. Somewhere between the carriage ride and the supplier meeting, and the casual touches that no longer felt quite so calculated, Beatrice had stopped being constantly aware of Alexander as her rival and started simply enjoying his company. "Maybe," she admitted. "Should I be concerned about that? I don't know. Should I?" Alexander reached across the table, his fingers brushing hers. "I think we're past the point of pretending this is entirely strategic. We've known each other less than 2 days as allies. We've known each other 7 years as rivals. That counts for something." It did. That was the problem. Because Beatrice could feel the careful walls she'd built around her heart beginning to crack, could feel herself wanting to believe that this unexpected alliance might become something more. "We should visit the other suppliers," she said, instead of addressing any of that. "Yes." But Alexander didn't release her hand immediately. "Beatrice, thank you." "For what?" "For trusting me, even a little. I know it doesn't come easily to you." No, it didn't, but somehow with Alexander, it felt less like a risk and more like an inevitability. They spent the rest of the day visiting suppliers, and by the time they returned to London, They'd secured 4 contracts and gathered significantly more intelligence about the Corwins' movements. More importantly, they'd fallen into an easy rhythm of collaboration that felt far too natural for comfort. As Alexander helped her from the carriage outside her townhouse, his hands lingered on her waist. "Tomorrow?" he asked. "Tomorrow. Beatrice?" He waited until she looked up. "What Philippa said, about us being comfortable together. She was right, and I'm not sorry about that." Neither was Beatrice, which was precisely what terrified her. Inside, she found another note waiting. This time the message was longer. "Miss Langford, your loyalty to Alexander Grayson is admirable but misplaced. Ask yourself, why would a duke suddenly court a woman whose family business directly competes with his own? Why now, at this precise moment? The answer is simpler than you think. He's securing his assets before making his move against you. We can prove it. Meet us tomorrow at the Waverley Gallery, 2 o'clock. Come alone, and we'll show you exactly what the Duke has planned. J.C." Beatrice crumpled the note slowly. The Corwins were getting desperate. That was good. It meant their counter-strategy was working. But it also meant things were about to get significantly more dangerous. Beatrice didn't go to the Waverley Gallery. Instead, she sent word to Alexander about the note, and they spent the morning coordinating a response. If the Corwins wanted to play games, they'd play right back. "We need to make them show their hand," Alexander said, pacing his study. They'd taken to meeting here rather than public locations, ostensibly for privacy, but really because Beatrice found she liked seeing him in his natural environment. He was less Duke here, more simply Alexander. "They're trying to isolate us," Beatrice observed. "Create doubt, drive wedges between our alliance. Because together we're too strong." Alexander stopped pacing, leaning against his desk. "They need one of us to break first. So we don't break." "No." His eyes met hers. "We do the opposite. We make them think they've succeeded in creating doubt, lure them into overplaying their hand." Beatrice saw where he was going. A trap. "Precisely. They've invited you to meet them. So you'll go, but not alone. I'll be there, hidden. And when they make their pitch, when they show whatever evidence they've fabricated, we expose them." Beatrice felt the familiar thrill of a good strategy taking shape. "But we need to be smart about this. If they suspect I'm not really doubting you, then you need to act like you are." Alexander's expression turned serious, "which means tonight, at the Waverley Ball, we need to have a very public disagreement." The suggestion hit like cold water. "You want people to think we're fighting? I want the Corwins to think they've successfully planted seeds of doubt. That means appearing as though I've done something to upset you, something that would make you question my intentions." It was sound strategy. It was also the last thing Beatrice wanted. "What kind of disagreement?" "Business-related. You could accuse me of trying to undercut your father's negotiations with the Liverpool merchants. It's plausible. We've competed for that contract before." "And conveniently unprovable either way," Beatrice added, "because the negotiations are confidential." "Exactly." Alexander moved closer. "But Beatrice, this only works if you can sell it. If you can make people believe you genuinely doubt me." Could she? A week ago the answer would have been yes. Now, with Alexander standing close enough that she could see the concern in his eyes, the task felt significantly more difficult. "I can do it," she said. "I know you can. That's not what concerns me." He reached up, tucking a loose curl behind her ear with the same casual intimacy he'd been affecting at the suppliers' meetings. Except now, there was no audience. No reason for it except that he apparently wanted to. "What concerns me," he continued quietly, "is that staging a fight means I'll have to say things I don't mean, things that might hurt you. I'm not fragile, Alexander. No, but you are important. And the thought of causing you pain, even strategically—" He stopped himself. "I'll try to keep it minimal." The vulnerability in his voice made Beatrice's chest ache. "It's just acting. Like everything else we've been doing." "Is it?" His thumb traced the line of her jaw. "Because I stopped acting somewhere around the 3rd supplier meeting, possibly earlier, and I suspect you did too." Beatrice's breath caught. "Alexander, I know. 6 weeks, temporary alliance, no expectations." His hand dropped. "But after we expose the Corwins, after this is all finished, I'd like permission to court you properly. Not as strategy, not as alliance. Just As a man who finds himself completely fascinated by a woman who terrifies and delights him in equal measure. The confession hung between them, raw and honest. Beatrice could retreat, could hide behind the safety of their arrangement, could pretend she didn't feel the same pull, or she could be brave. "Ask me again after the Corwins are dealt with," she said softly, "when there's no strategy complicating things. And if you say no, then I say no, and we part ways as agreed." She met his gaze. "But Alexander, I don't think I'm going to say no." His smile was slow and devastating. "Good, because I've become rather attached to having you as a partner. In business? In everything." The kiss happened before Beatrice could overthink it. Alexander's mouth found hers with surprising gentleness, one hand cradling her face while the other settled at her waist. It wasn't the passionate, consuming kiss of Gothic novels. It was careful, questioning, giving her space to pull away. She didn't pull away. Instead, she pressed closer, her hands finding the lapels of his coat, and allowed herself this one moment of honesty. Alexander made a low sound of approval, deepening the kiss but maintaining that careful control. As though she were something precious he was afraid to break. When they finally stepped back, pulses racing, Alexander rested his forehead against hers. "That was not part of the plan," Beatrice finished. "No. Should I apologize? If you do, I'll be terribly offended." He laughed, the sound warm and genuine. "Then I won't. Though I should probably note that kissing you is significantly more enjoyable than arguing with you." "Only significantly? I must be losing my touch." "Devastatingly more enjoyable," he amended. "World-endingly. Catastrophically. Better." Beatrice stepped back, needing distance to think clearly. "We should focus. Tonight's performance will be convincing because we both understand what we're risking." Alexander's expression sobered. "The Corwins will be watching. They need to believe they've won. Then we'll make them believe it." The Waverley Ball was already in full swing when Beatrice arrived. She'd chosen her armour carefully, a gown of deep burgundy that made her look powerful rather than delicate, her hair swept up to expose the long line of her neck. She looked like a woman ready for battle. Which was precisely the point. Alexander was already there, surrounded by admirers, but watching the entrance. Their eyes met across the ballroom, and Beatrice saw the flash of heat in his gaze before he schooled his expression back to neutral. Tonight, they were courting couple on the verge of fracture. Nothing more. She made her way through the crowd slowly, stopping to greet acquaintances, accepting compliments on her gown. From the corner of her eye, she tracked Alexander's movement, saw him extract himself from his group, saw him approaching with purposeful strides. "Miss Langford." His voice was cool, formal. "Might I have a word?" "Of course, Your Grace." The title was deliberate, putting distance between them. She saw several heads turn, noting the shift. Good. Let them wonder. Alexander guided her toward a relatively private alcove, though not so private that they couldn't be observed. His hand on her elbow was correct rather than intimate. "I received word from the Liverpool merchants," he said, his voice pitched to carry just enough. "They've accepted my family's proposal." Beatrice had known this was coming. They'd rehearsed this. But the flash of betrayal she forced into her expression wasn't entirely feigned. "You negotiated with them. After we agreed to coordinate our approach, I negotiated what was best for Grayson and Sons, as you would have done for Langford Mills. We had an agreement, Alexander, a business agreement which I've honored." His expression was carefully neutral. "You didn't actually expect me to pass up a lucrative contract simply because we're courting." The word "simply" was a calculated blow. Beatrice felt it land even knowing it was strategy. "I expected you to honor your word. I have honored it. Nothing in our arrangement precluded me from pursuing my family's interests." "No, I suppose it didn't." Beatrice kept her voice level, aware of the growing audience. "How foolish of me to assume partnership meant actual cooperation rather than convenient access to my family's supplier contacts." Alexander's jaw tightened. "That's not, isn't it?" She stepped closer, dropping her voice to a harsh whisper that would still carry. "You've been to every one of our facilities, met with our key suppliers, reviewed our contracts, and now, conveniently, you've secured a deal that directly undercuts our expansion plans. If you're suggesting I used our courtship for competitive advantage, I'm not suggesting anything. I'm observing facts." Beatrice turned to leave. Thank you for clarifying the nature of our arrangement, Your Grace. It won't happen again. She walked away before he could respond, feeling the weight of dozens of stares. Behind her, she heard the immediate explosion of whispers. The Tun loved nothing more than watching a courtship implode. Philippa materialized at her elbow within minutes. That was quite a performance, she murmured. Almost believed it myself. It needed to be convincing. Oh, it was. Several matrons are already composing cautionary tales about trusting dukes. Philippa squeezed her arm. Are you all right? I'm fine. Darling, you're shaking. Beatrice looked down at her hands, surprised to find Philippa was right. It's just saying those things to him, even knowing its strategy, felt awful. Philippa's expression softened. Because somewhere in the past week, you stopped seeing him as a rival and started seeing him as something more. We have a plan. This is part of it. I know. That doesn't make it easier. Philippa guided her toward the refreshment table. The Corwins are watching you, by the way. Julian looks positively triumphant. Good. That meant the performance had worked. Beatrice accepted a glass of champagne she didn't want, using it as a prop while she scanned the room. Julian stood near the terrace doors, Isabel beside him, both wearing expressions of carefully concealed satisfaction. They thought they'd won. Now came the dangerous part. Beatrice waited precisely 20 minutes before making her way toward the terrace, timing it so she'd pass near the Corwins. Julian stepped into her path, as though by accident. Miss Langford, forgive me, but you seem distressed. I'm perfectly fine, Mr. Corwin. Are you? His expression was all false sympathy. I couldn't help but overhear your conversation with the Duke. How unfortunate. Business disagreements happen. Of course, though one can't help but wonder if perhaps we were right. He lowered his voice. About His Grace's true intentions. Beatrice let herself hesitate, as though considering. I don't know what you mean. Don't you? Isabel moved closer. You're an intelligent woman, Miss Langford. Surely you've noticed the pattern. The Duke expresses sudden romantic interest, gains access to your family's business operations, and then, conveniently, secures deals that benefit him at your expense. That's quite an accusation. Is it an accusation if it's simply observation? Julian's tone was gentle, poisonous. We did try to warn you. But perhaps now you're ready to hear what we have to say? Beatrice glanced toward the ballroom, where Alexander stood in conversation with Lord Ashworth, his expression unreadable. I don't think— Tomorrow, Isabel interrupted softly. The Waverley Gallery, 2 o'clock. We have documentation that will prove the Duke has been systematically using your courtship to undermine your family's business. If we're wrong, you lose nothing by looking. If we're right— She let the sentence trail meaningfully. Beatrice took a slow breath as though steeling herself. 2 o'clock. Excellent. Julian's smile was victorious. We look forward to showing you the truth, Miss Langford. Sometimes the hardest thing is admitting we've been deceived by those we wanted to trust. They departed, leaving Beatrice alone on the terrace. She counted to 30, then returned inside, carefully avoiding Alexander's gaze for the rest of the evening. The message was clear. She was doubting him, questioning everything. The Corwins had taken the bait. Now they simply had to survive springing the trap. The Waverley Gallery was fashionably empty at 2 o'clock. Beatrice arrived precisely on time, her heart hammering despite knowing Alexander was already there, hidden in the private viewing room adjacent to the main gallery. They'd planned this carefully. The gallery owner was a friend of Alexander's family, willing to facilitate the deception. Julian and Isabel appeared within minutes, carrying a leather portfolio that presumably held their evidence. Miss Langford. Julian's smile was warm, genuine seeming. Thank you for coming. I know this must be difficult. Show me what you have, Beatrice said, not bothering with pleasantries. Isabel spread documents across the gallery's central table. These are contracts the Duke signed 3 weeks ago, before his sudden interest in courting you. Notice the dates. Beatrice studied them. They appeared legitimate. Agreements with several merchants that would directly compete with Langford Mill's operations. He was already planning to move against us, Julian continued. The courtship was simply a more elegant way to gather intelligence first. See here. He pointed to another document. This is a letter from the Duke to one of your suppliers, dated 5 days ago. He's offering better terms, but only if they terminate their contracts with your family. The evidence was damning. If Beatrice hadn't known it was fabricated, She might have believed it herself. "Why are you showing me this?" she asked. "Because we understand what it's like to be underestimated," Isabel said softly. "To have people see you as a means to an end rather than a person of value. The Duke sees your business connections, not you." "And you're different?" "We're offering genuine partnership." Julian leaned forward. "Your family's textile expertise combined with our shipping infrastructure, we could dominate London trade. No deception, no hidden agendas, just three people working together toward mutual success." It was a good pitch. Almost believable. Almost. "There's one problem with your evidence," Beatrice said quietly. "Oh?" Julian's confidence didn't waver. "Those contracts are forgeries. Rather good ones, I'll admit, but forgeries nonetheless." She watched their expressions shift. "The dates are wrong. The Duke was in Scotland 3 weeks ago, not in London signing contracts. I know because I verified his travel schedule this morning." "You're defending him." Isabel's voice turned cold. "Even after what he did last night." "What he did last night was exactly what we planned." Beatrice stepped back as Alexander emerged from the viewing room, followed by 2 constables and the gallery owner. "We knew you were trying to drive a wedge between us, so we let you think it worked." Julian's face went white. "This is, you can't forge documents, attempt fraud?" Alexander's voice was arctic. "I believe we can. We have witnesses to this meeting. We have your forged contracts, and we have testimony from 3 suppliers about your attempts to manipulate them into breaching existing agreements." "You have nothing," Isabel hissed. "Our contracts are perfectly legal." "Your shell companies are illegal," Beatrice corrected. "The ones you used to hide your father's embezzled funds. The ones you're using now to acquire property through fraudulent means." She pulled out her own documents. "Did you really think we wouldn't investigate? Alexander's solicitors have been tracing every transaction. You're not building a shipping empire, you're running a criminal enterprise." The fight went out of both siblings simultaneously. Julian slumped into a chair while Isabel stared at the evidence in Beatrice's hands, her face ashen. "We needed," Julian said finally, his voice barely audible. "After our father's death, after the scandal, we had nothing. This was supposed to be our chance to rebuild. By destroying everyone else?" Alexander's tone was unforgiving. "That's not rebuilding. That's revenge." The constables stepped forward, but Isabel held up a hand. "Wait. What if we leave? Tonight. Take what assets we have left and disappear. You'll never hear from us again. And let you do this to some other city?" Beatrice shook her head. "No. You made choices. Now you face consequences." As the constables led them away, Julian looked back once. "You two deserve each other," he said, not entirely as an insult. "You're both ruthless when it counts." After they were gone, Beatrice sagged against the table, the adrenaline draining away. Alexander was beside her immediately, his hand steadying her elbow. "Are you all right?" he asked. "I will be. That was terrifying, necessary, brilliantly executed." His hand moved to cup her face. "You were magnificent." "We were magnificent," Beatrice corrected. "This was partnership, remember? The best kind." Alexander's thumb brushed her cheekbone. "Beatrice, about last night, I know it was strategy. That doesn't mean it didn't hurt to say those things to you." His expression was serious. "Even knowing it was temporary, even knowing we were playing roles, treating you with anything less than complete respect, felt wrong. You were protecting us, protecting what we've built." "What we've built," he repeated softly. "Yes, I quite like the sound of that." The gallery owner discreetly cleared his throat. "Your Grace, Miss Langford, I'll need to close the gallery now, unless there's anything else." "No. Thank you, Marcus." Alexander offered Beatrice his arm. "May I escort you home?" Outside, the afternoon sun felt too bright after the gallery's dim interior. Beatrice blinked, disoriented by the sudden shift from danger to normalcy. "It's over," she said, not quite believing it. "The Corwin threat is over," Alexander agreed, "but we still have 4 weeks remaining in our agreement." "Do we need them?" "The reason for the arrangement was to investigate the Corwins, yes." Alexander stopped walking, turning to face her fully. "But I believe I made my intentions clear. I'd like to continue seeing you, Beatrice, not as strategy, not as business alliance, but as a man courting a woman he's come to admire beyond measure." "You're asking permission?" "I'm asking if what we've had these past 2 weeks, the easy collaboration, the conversations that lasted hours, the moments when we forgot to pretend, if any of that was real for you. Beatrice thought about the supplier meetings where they'd finished each other's sentences, about the carriage rides filled with debate and laughter, about the kiss in his study that had felt like coming home. It was real, she admitted. Terrifyingly real. Terrifying, Alexander repeated with a slight smile. Why terrifying? Because I've spent my entire life proving I don't need anyone, that I can succeed alone. Wanting you means admitting that maybe being chosen and being respected aren't mutually exclusive, that maybe partnership doesn't make me weak. It doesn't. He stepped closer. Beatrice, you're the strongest person I know. That doesn't change because you allow yourself to want connection. If anything, it takes more courage to be vulnerable than to be isolated. Is that what you did when you suggested courtship? I took a risk, he admitted. I'd spent 7 years watching you from across boardrooms, admiring your mind while telling myself it was simply professional respect. Then the Corwins gave me an excuse to get closer, and I realized I didn't want an excuse anymore. I wanted the reality. And if I'd said no to all of this, then I would have respected that. Your autonomy, your choices, they matter more than my desires. His hand found hers. But I'm hoping you won't say no. I'm hoping you'll give us a chance to discover what happens when two people who've been circling each other for years finally move in the same direction. Beatrice looked at their joined hands, at the man who'd been her rival, and was now something infinitely more complicated and precious. I spent years believing that being wanted meant giving up who I was. That love required submission. And now? Now I think maybe I was wrong. Maybe the right person doesn't ask you to be smaller. They challenge you to be more fully yourself than you've ever dared. She met his gaze. You've never once tried to diminish me, Alexander, even when we were rivals. Because you're not someone who can be diminished. You're brilliant and fierce and occasionally terrifying, and I wouldn't change any of it. I'm also stubborn and prideful and terrible at asking for help. I know, I'm arrogant and controlling and have a tendency to assume I'm always right. His smile was self-deprecating. We're rather a disaster, aren't we? Probably. And yet I can't imagine going back to the way things were before. When you were just the irritating duke I competed with rather than the irritating duke I... She stopped herself. You what? Alexander's voice was gentle, coaxing. Care about, Beatrice finished quietly, rather more than I planned to. Good. His thumb traced circles on her palm. Because I've been half in love with you since you told the Board of Trade. I had the foresight of a dim child. And I'm finding that half is no longer an adequate measure. The confession stole her breath. Alexander, you don't have to say it back. Not until you're ready. Not until you're certain. He raised her hand to his lips. But know that I'm certain. That whether we have 4 weeks or 4 decades, I intend to spend that time proving that being wanted by me means being seen, respected, and challenged. Never diminished. Beatrice's eyes burned. That's the most romantic thing anyone's ever said to me. Is it? Because I have several more planned. I've been composing them mentally for the better part of a week. Despite everything, she laughed. You've been planning romantic speeches. I'm a strategist. Did you expect anything less? His expression turned serious. Though I should warn you, my family can be challenging. My mother has very specific ideas about appropriate matches for dukes. Will I meet her expectations? You'll terrify her, delight my father, and probably scandalize half the family by refusing to give up your role in Langford Mills. Alexander's smile was fierce with pride. It will be magnificent. You sound very certain of that. I am. Because you're not someone who compromises who she is for anyone. And that includes me. He paused. Though I should mention, if we do this properly, if we truly court with the intention of something permanent, I will eventually want marriage and children. A future that combines both our family's legacies rather than forcing you to choose. The careful way he said it made Beatrice's chest ache. You've thought about this. Extensively. Too much, probably. Alexander looked almost embarrassed. I may have even asked my solicitors about partnership structures that would allow you to maintain independent control of your business after marriage. There are precedents, apparently. Not many, but they exist. You researched partnership marriage contracts. I told you. I've been half in love with you for years. The research simply became more urgent recently. Beatrice pressed her free hand to her mouth, overwhelmed by the thoughtfulness of it. By the understanding that Alexander hadn't just fallen for who she was, he'd built their potential future around preserving exactly that. "Ask me again," she said, "about courting you properly." "Miss Langford," Alexander said, his voice formal but his eyes warm, "would you do me the extraordinary honor of allowing me to court you? Not as strategy, not as alliance, but as a man who finds himself completely besotted with a woman who is his equal in every way that matters." "Yes?" The word came easily, naturally. "Yes, I would like that very much." His kiss was different this time, less careful, more certain. His hands framed her face as though she were infinitely precious, and Beatrice let herself sink into it, let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she could have both the business empire she'd fought for and the partnership she'd never known she wanted. When they finally separated, both breathing hard, Alexander rested his forehead against hers. "I should return you home, before we scandalize your family's entire staff by making love in the middle of a public street. That would be terribly improper. Devastatingly so." But he didn't move. "Though I should mention, once we're married, I plan to be devastatingly improper with you quite frequently." Heat flooded Beatrice's face. "Alexander, too much?" "Not enough," she admitted, surprising herself with her honesty. "But I suspect we should save that particular conversation for after you've secured my father's permission." "Practical as always." Alexander stepped back, offering his arm. "Come, I'll return you home properly, speak with your father like a gentleman, and then spend the next several weeks wooing you with all the romance and strategy I can muster." That sounds perfect, and it did. All of it. The partnership, the passion, the promise of a future where she wouldn't have to choose between respect and desire. As they walked back to her family's townhouse, Beatrice found herself imagining that future. Business negotiations, where they worked as allies rather than opponents. Evenings spent debating strategy and planning expansion. Children who would inherit both families' legacies and never be told they had to choose between them. It was more than she'd ever let herself hope for, and with Alexander's hand warm in hers, it felt entirely possible. 3 months later, Beatrice stood in the study she now shared with Alexander, reviewing contracts for their newly merged distribution network. The marriage had happened quietly, with only close family and friends because neither of them enjoyed spectacle. What they did enjoy was working together. "These numbers are wrong," she said, pointing to a column in the shipping manifest. Alexander looked up from his own papers. "How do you mean?" "You've allocated 3 vessels to the southern route, but we'll need 4 during winter months. The Thames freezes in sections. We covered this in the November planning meeting." "We did." He made the correction with a small smile. "I was testing to see if you'd catch it." "Liar. You forgot." "I absolutely forgot." Alexander set down his pen. "But watching you correct me is one of my favorite pastimes now." "Is it?" "It's deeply attractive when you prove me wrong." "Always has been." He rose from his chair, moving to stand behind her. His hands settled on her shoulders, thumbs working at the tension there. "Though I should mention you've been working for 6 hours straight, perhaps we should consider dinner." Beatrice leaned back into his touch. "After I finish this section." "Of course. Because you've never met a deadline you couldn't beat by 3 days." His lips brushed her temple. "I love that about you." "You love my competitiveness?" "I love everything about you." He turned her chair so she faced him, but particularly the parts that most people would find challenging. Your refusal to compromise. Your insistence on being right when you are, in fact, right. The way you look at me when I suggest something foolish, like I'm a particularly disappointing student who should know better. I don't. You absolutely do. It's magnificent. Alexander knelt beside her chair, his expression turning serious. "Beatrice, I have something I want to discuss." Her pulse kicked up at his tone. "That sounds ominous." "Not ominous. Hopeful." He took her hand. "We've been married 3 months. The business merger has exceeded all projections. Your father has officially retired, leaving you in complete control of the mills. And I find myself thinking about the future quite often." "What about it?" "About children." He said it carefully, watching her face. "I know we've discussed it in abstract, but I wanted to know, are you ready or would you prefer to wait?" Beatrice's throat tightened. They'd talked about this before marriage, about how any children would inherit both empires, how they'd be raised to see business and partnership as equally valuable. But Alexander was asking something more specific now. "You want children," she said. "I want your children." His thumb traced circles on her palm. "I want to watch you teach them strategy and resilience. I want to see them inherit your brilliance and hopefully my patience, though given our temperaments, they'll probably be tiny, terrifying geniuses who question everything." "That sounds exhausting." "That sounds perfect." He raised her hand to his lips. "But only when you're ready. Your timeline, your choice. I'm simply stating my intentions." The honesty of it made Beatrice's eyes burn. "And if I said I wasn't ready, then we'd wait. This isn't negotiation, love, it's conversation." He paused. "Though I should mention, I think about it often. About a little girl with your eyes and determination, or a boy who inherits your gift for seeing 3 moves ahead. About teaching them that partnership is strength, not weakness. You've thought about this specifically." "Extensively." His smile turned self-deprecating. "I'm a strategist, married to another strategist. Did you think I wouldn't plan our children's education before they're even conceived?" "That's very you. Is it terrible that I want them soon?" The vulnerability in his voice caught her off guard. "Not immediately, but soon. I want to build that future with you, Beatrice. The family we both never quite fit into growing up. I want us to create something better." Beatrice cupped his face, studying the man who'd somehow become essential to her existence. "Ask me again in a year, after we've consolidated the Norfolk expansion and established the new trade routes." Practical as always. "But Alexander..." She leaned forward, pressing her forehead to his. "The answer will be yes, I already know that. I simply want to do this right, to ensure I can be both mother and business owner without sacrificing either." "You won't sacrifice anything. We'll hire staff, coordinate schedules, share responsibilities equally." His hands framed her face. "And when you're ready, whether that's in 1 year or 5, I'll be here, ready to begin that adventure with you." 1 year, Beatrice confirmed. "And then I would very much like to have your children, to build something that combines everything we are." "I adore you." Alexander kissed her slowly, thoroughly. "Though I should warn you, I intend to spend the next year practicing very diligently for this eventual eventuality." Heat pooled low in her belly. "Practicing?" "Extensively, thoroughly, with great attention to detail and technique." His mouth curved against hers. "I am nothing if not dedicated to mastering new skills." "Alexander Grayson, are you attempting to seduce your wife in her own study?" "Our study, and yes, absolutely." He rose, pulling her with him. "Unless you'd prefer to finish those contracts first." Beatrice glanced at the papers, then back at her husband. "The contracts can wait." "Excellent decision." He swept her up, carrying her toward their bedroom with the same confidence he brought to every business negotiation. "You know what I love most about you?" "My strategic mind?" "That too, but primarily your ability to prioritize." He set her down beside their bed, his hands already working at the buttons of her dress. "Romance first, paperwork second. I never agreed to that hierarchy. You're about to." His mouth found the curve of her neck. Repeatedly. And he was right. But then Alexander usually was. About business, about strategy, about the way desire and respect could coexist in perfect balance. About the fact that being wanted by the right person meant being seen completely and loved precisely for that. Epilogue. 1 year later, Beatrice stood in the nursery of their London home, watching Alexander assemble what was supposed to be a cradle, but currently resembled a complicated wooden puzzle. "The instructions are unclear," he muttered, studying the diagram. "The instructions are perfectly clear. You're simply being stubborn about asking for help." "I'm not stubborn." "Alexander, you once spent 3 days trying to solve a shipping route problem, rather than consulting with your logistics manager, because you were convinced you could figure it out yourself." "I did figure it out." After 3 days, and considerable frustration, Beatrice moved closer, studying the half-assembled cradle. "You've got piece 7 attached where piece 4 should be." "I do not." He stopped, comparing the diagram to his work. "I absolutely do. Would you like help?" "No." "Yes. Maybe." Alexander set down the pieces with a sigh. "I wanted to do this myself. It seemed important. The first thing our child sleeps in should be built by their father." "That's very sweet. But Alexander, our child will value having a father who knows when to accept assistance more than having a cradle built from stubborn pride." "When did you become so wise?" "I've always been wise. You're simply more willing to acknowledge it now." She settled onto the window seat, one hand resting on her rounded belly, though I appreciate the sentiment, even if the execution is questionable. Alexander abandoned the cradle, crossing to kneel beside her. His hand covered hers, feeling the flutter of movement beneath. Strong kicks today. Very strong. I think we're having a tiny dictator, or a future business magnate. He leaned close, speaking to her belly. Hear that? Your mother thinks you're going to be demanding. I'm choosing to interpret that as leadership potential. You're ridiculous. I'm excited. He looked up at her, his expression open and vulnerable in a way it had taken months of marriage to achieve. We're having a baby, Beatrice. A child who will inherit both our family's legacies, who will be taught that strength comes in many forms, and who will probably be impossibly stubborn given their parents. Undoubtedly. Alexander's hand splayed across her belly. But they'll be loved, and respected, and never made to feel they have to choose between who they are and who the world wants them to be. Beatrice's throat tightened. You're going to be an excellent father. I'm going to try. He pressed a kiss to her stomach, then another. And you're going to be magnificent. You're already managing 3 factories, overseeing 2 major expansions, and growing an entire human being. If that's not strength, I don't know what is. Partnership helps. It does. Alexander rose, pulling her gently to her feet. Come, let me show you something. He led her to his study, where a leather-bound book rested on his desk. Inside, Beatrice found carefully documented notes, every decision they'd made since marriage, every successful strategy, every lesson learned. What is this? She asked. A record. For them. He indicated her belly. I've been keeping it since the wedding. Everything we've built together, every challenge we've overcome. I want our children to know that partnership isn't always easy, but it's always worth it. You've been secretly documenting our marriage. I prefer thoughtfully recording our joint legacy. His smile was self-deprecating. Though yes, secretly. I wanted to surprise you. Beatrice flipped through pages, seeing their journey captured in Alexander's precise handwriting. Business decisions, certainly, but also personal moments. The night she'd cried over losing a supplier to illness. The morning he'd discovered she'd negotiated a contract in his favor without his knowledge. The 1,000 small kindnesses that had transformed rivalry into partnership, into love. This is beautiful, she whispered. This is us. Alexander wrapped his arms around her from behind, his hands settling over hers on the book. Everything we've built, everything we're still building. He pressed a kiss to her temple. And in about 4 months we'll add the most important chapter yet. You're assuming they'll arrive on schedule. Our child? Absolutely. They'll be punctual, organized, and probably already planning their first business venture from the womb. That's a terrifying thought. That's an exciting thought. He turned her in his arms. Beatrice, I know we agreed to wait a year, and I've appreciated every moment of it, watching our business thrive, watching you command boardrooms while negotiating international contracts. But I want you to know, I'm so ready for this. For the chaos and exhaustion and joy, for midnight feedings and tiny crying and all of it. Even the parts where I'm impossible, especially those parts. His hand cupped her face. You'll probably try to negotiate sleep schedules with a newborn. You'll definitely create a comprehensive feeding chart with contingency plans, and I'll love every obsessively organized moment of it. I'm not that bad. You color-coded our linen closet. That was practical. You created a filing system for dinner menus. Alexander, I'm not complaining, I'm celebrating. He kissed her slowly. I'm celebrating that I married a woman who brings the same brilliant, strategic, occasionally overwhelming intensity to everything she does, including motherhood, including loving me. I do love you. The words came easily now, without the fear that had accompanied them initially. Impossibly, inconveniently, irreversibly. Impossibly, he raised an eyebrow. You're infuriating at least 40% of the time. Only 40? I must be slipping. Alexander's hand slipped to her belly again. Though I have to say, this year has been the best of my life, watching you build our empire while preparing for our family. Seeing you refuse to choose between success and happiness because you've realized you deserve both. We deserve both. We do. He rested his forehead against hers. And soon we'll have everything. The business we've built together. The family we're creating. The future where our children never doubt they can have both power and partnership. Beatrice closed her eyes, imagining it. Imagining teaching their child to negotiate and strategize. Imagining Alexander reading bedtime stories about business ethics. Imagining the beautiful chaos of combining ambition with love. "Ask me again," she whispered, "about the timeline. I thought we agreed. Ask me again about wanting children, about our future." Alexander pulled back slightly, studying her face. "Beatrice Grayson, I want our children. I want them soon, and fiercely, and with all the consuming intensity I bring to everything I want in this life. I want to watch you teach them to be brilliant and brave. I want to build a legacy that honors both our families while creating something entirely new." His voice dropped, intimate and certain. "I want all of it with you." "Good." Beatrice took his hand, placing it firmly on her belly where their child kicked persistently. "Because in approximately 4 months you're going to get exactly that." "I know, I literally just said—" He stopped. "Wait. Are you saying what I think you're saying?" "I'm saying that I've spent this year building our business and our future simultaneously, that I've organized schedules and hired staff and created contingency plans for every possible scenario." She smiled up at him. "That I'm ready. That I want this, all of it, with you. Beatrice." His voice broke on her name. "Oh, you're extraordinary. I'm practical, there's a difference. You're both." Alexander kissed her deeply, his hands cradling her face like she was infinitely precious. "And in 4 months, we're going to have a child who inherits all of that. Your intelligence, your strategy, your refusal to accept limitations. And your patience, your dedication, your ability to see me completely and love what you see. Our child is going to be unstoppable." "Our children," Beatrice corrected. "Plural. Eventually, if this one doesn't completely destroy us first." Alexander's laugh was pure joy. "Plural. I like the sound of that." He knelt again, pressing kisses to her belly with dedicated focus. "Hear that? Your mother's already planning siblings. You're getting the full Beatrice Grayson strategic treatment. You're talking to my stomach. I'm talking to our child, there's a difference." He looked up at her, his expression tender. "I love you. Both of you. All of you. I love every brilliant, stubborn, strategic part of you. I love you too, even when you're being impossibly romantic. Especially when I'm being impossibly romantic," he corrected. "Because you need it. You need someone to remind you that you're not just a business strategist or a textile magnate or a woman defying social expectations. You're also beloved, cherished, essential." Beatrice's eyes burned. "Alexander." "I mean it." He rose, pulling her close again. "You've spent so much of your life proving you don't need anyone. I want to spend the rest of our lives showing you that needing and being needed doesn't make you weak. It makes you human. It makes you mine." "Ours," she corrected, gesturing to her belly. "Ours," he agreed. "A partnership that started in rivalry, transformed into love, and is now becoming something even more extraordinary. A family." "Yes." Alexander's smile was brilliant. "A family that combines everything we are and creates something better." Beatrice leaned into him, feeling the solid warmth of his body, the steady beat of his heart, the absolute certainty of his love. This, right here, was what she'd never known she wanted, what she'd been afraid to hope for. Partnership, passion, purpose, all of it together. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For seeing me, for choosing me, for building a future where I don't have to be smaller to be loved." "Beatrice." Alexander's voice was fierce. "I could never love you smaller. I only know how to love you exactly as you are, brilliant, fierce, occasionally impossible, and absolutely essential to my existence." He kissed her forehead. "You are everything I never knew I needed, everything I will spend a lifetime deserving. You already deserve me. We deserve each other. We do." He rested his hand over hers on her belly, both of them feeling the flutter of movement. "And in 4 months we'll prove it to the world. A duke and a businesswoman raising children who will never doubt they can have both power and love, both success and connection. It's going to be chaos. It's going to be perfect." And looking up at Alexander, at the man who'd been her rival, her ally, her partner, her love, Beatrice believed him. Because they'd already proven the impossible was possible. They'd already built something extraordinary from rivalry and strategy and the courage to want more. Now they simply had to do it again. Together. The end. Thank you for staying until the last note faded. If you felt seen in Beatrice's journey from independence to partnership, or in Alexander's path from rivalry to devoted love, leave a comment. Your stories of finding strength in connection matter. Subscribe for more tales where ambition and romance aren't opposites but complementary forces. You're the reason these stories exist. Thank you for being here.